So I'd say about 70% of the time, our mail is being automatically sorted by artificial intelligence, which is pretty cool.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to the Automated Lawyer Podcast. I am one of your hosts, John Fritz, and I'm joined by our other co-host, Dan Schnirbush. Dan, what's going on today?
How's it going, John? Not too much. It's going good. We're enjoying the sun and the heat. I was just telling you offline, we've been battling a wasp infestation in our backyard, which is terrifying my children and keeping them out of our swimming pool. And when you keep the little kids out of the swimming pool, it makes for a hard summer. So it is top priority at the moment. But
Yeah, you don't want to do that. You definitely do not want to take away a really easy kids activity during the hot summer.
and how about yourself? I know you just got back from vacation. How did things go?
Really well, really well. Yeah, there's lots of pools and slides and lazy rivers and a little bit of beach time. So,
There you go.
anytime to get away with the family and take a break from all of the law firm craziness is always a good time. But, honestly, towards the end of that, that week trip, every single time I'm like, kind of chomping at the bit to get back in the game, and start working again. So.
Yeah, it's funny. Being at the beach when you have lots of small children, or even just like a couple of small children, I found it is not quite as fun as it was when you're younger. You got somebody else's sweaty body to smear, suntan lotion on, and they always want to climb into your lap. And you're like, oh, no, get out. But sand
That's
grinding
hilarious.
is what it is. But so all right. So today we talked about virtual law offices. So a lot of people probably got hit with this, when at the very latest when the pandemic came around. And, everybody's trying to figure out, how do I run this practice when nobody wants to come to my office in person all of a sudden? And in many cases, we're not even allowed to when we were under a lockdown for a
Yeah.
little while there. I don't know if everywhere locked down, but I know in Missouri, we locked down pretty extensively. And coincidentally, that was around the time that I launched the law firm. So, we had to start from virtual in the beginning and get all that figured out. But I remember it was wild times, and everything was shifting toward, how do I operate virtually? How do I get my team on board? What was your experience like? I know you run a fairly virtual practice as well. How did you get started in that method of working?
So obviously, the even pre-COVID, I was trying to use Zoom and whatnot to function as a law firm before all that happened. It didn't make a whole lot of sense, especially when I was doing estate planning, right? To have people come to the office, and I understand that there's some reasons why you want to have people come in and sit down and talk to people about certain things, right? But I also had a lot of younger professional clients that would be in maybe two different states trying to do planning, or just at the office and someone was at home. So just making it really convenient on the clients, with Zoom. And so I started using Zoom for estate planning meetings. And then COVID hit, and then it became the norm. And then it was, pretty amazing for, being able to be more efficient. And that's kind of, what my overarching theme is of my probate law firm practices. Let's be as efficient as possible. So yeah, kind of started a little bit pre-COVID and then moved into COVID. And then ever since, just adding more layers of virtualness, right? We use Microsoft Teams. I don't even really use Zoom that much anymore for clients. A lot of my stuff is done through, our dedicated client portal platform, right? Through case status. So we don't almost all my communication is done through there. I will see people in person that really want to come in, but for the vast majority of the time, we're dealing with people, online. So
Yeah. Yeah, my experience with that was very similar. COVID came around, opened the practice, doing Zoom for estate planning, and like you, everybody wanted to do virtual, and everybody was cool with it, and that just kind of continued. We started taking on probate clients about a year later, and in fact, many of those are just over the phone, and they to this day kind of remain over the phone. People call in, we have a conversation. In most cases, there's some level of trust, and we'll talk about like where does that trust come from in a virtual law firm in a few minutes. But they're willing to to move forward just over a phone consultation, or in some cases we do a Zoom for those as well. But generally we're meeting on Zoom for those initial calls. If it's estate planning, we're doing, the design meeting over Zoom in most cases. But then after that, it's a matter of kind of handling the case, especially for probate, is just getting it done. And most of those are handled over the phone. Um, so from a client facing perspective, being virtual, like you said, a lot more convenient for the clients, a lot more convenient for us. We don't have to deal with having the overhead of an office. Works particularly well when you're kind of at a smaller scale. So like you, I think you said you use Teams. We're kind of a Google Workspace firm, so we use, uh, Google Docs and Google Chat. Google Chat is how we kind of handle our communication. We were using Slack for a while, which I know is very popular. And it was nice,
Yeah.
but I just kind of came to the conclusion, like, we're already paying for Google Chat. Like, why do we need two? So we ended up canning Slack and just moving it all into Google Chat. And it works real well. Super simple. Um, and helps kind of keep the team communication flowing in many ways. Um, so let's kind of talk about that tool from a tool perspective. So like obviously our focus is kind of on the technology here at the Automated Lawyer. So a big piece of in my mind, a big piece of enabling a virtual law practice is how do we put these pieces together to be able to operate virtually. So like we can't walk down the hall and assign a project to somebody and explain to them how to do it, or we can't like pop our head in the door and be like, hey, where you at on the Johnson project? We can't do those sorts of things. So how have you been able to leverage technology to kind of replicate some of the experience of, or at least the important experience of being in person with people? How are you guys managing?
Yeah, so I mean, I think yeah, communication, like you said, is one of the most important things. I think just in general in life, communication is important, whether it's at home, whether it's at the office with your team members. And so just having that open line of communication and having that procedure in place where everybody knows what the communications standard is, right? How are we going to communicate with each other? And so, like I said, we use Teams. It's just, there's, like you said, there's Slack, there's Google Chat, there's so many other options out there as well. As long as everybody is able to, communicate efficiently. And I think video is the most efficient when it comes to, having other team members, right? I want to see my person that's, even though they might be in another state, have paralegals, in different states or even one in a different country. But being able to see them every morning, have still have that human connection, right? It's really important. And so we do a call every morning where we have a team call in the morning, and we talk about. I probably took this from somebody else that meant used in the past, but we do like a wins and focuses for the day each morning to kind of have that connectivity, right? We're able to address kind of any issues for the day, and then we, which is all done through just Teams video. But then we also have Teams chats that are set up for myself and all the team members, myself in production. So you can kind of create your own, obviously, custom chats with who you want to talk to, but that everybody knows, like, hey, this is our mode of communication. We're not emailing each other. Like we never email each other ever. It's
Mhm.
always done through either Teams, and then there's other platforms you can use. You can to communicate with each other through those, but if it's a file that we're working on and it's kind of like, hey, this is a task, this is an issue with the file, we put that in our case management system in FileVine, right? As a message or like as a note to the file. But if it's just simply a, hey, can we talk about this client working to work on something, or if it's something more high level, then we just put it in Teams.
Yeah, yeah, very, very similar setup that we kind of do. So I have weekly meetings with each team member, and those are on Zoom where we'll pop on for an hour in the morning and say, hey, what have you been working on? What's going to be on the agenda for this week or these couple of days, or what are you struggling with? What more tools do you need to enable you to work at your highest level? Things like that, or problems have you noticed? and we kind of dive into that. And honestly, like those meetings could probably be shorter, but I like them to be longer because, without that in person meeting space, I feel like we need time to just to connect, and in that virtual one on one kind of or small team, small group, face to face setting. There needs to be something to kind of replicate that, that the water cooler effect of, like, being around the office and everybody's, hanging out in their office for a half an hour. I remember when I used to practice, like, you might be talking to somebody at their desk for a half an hour about a case or about some other thing. We're just kind of, getting to know each other better and building relationships, which I think you need to apply some, like, deliberate attention to a little bit in a virtual practice, because it can so easily disappear and become just robotic, worker interaction kind of thing, and lose some of that personal touch. So those kind of tools I think, have been critical, is, having instantaneous chat communication, and, whether that's Slack or Teams or whatever, and, being able to have those open lines of communication, like you said, and that video communication. And then when we're actually talking, about the actual process, like you, of handling, what is going on in our case, what kind of, who's assigned to what, how are we triaging that? Those aren't getting lost in email chains, because, like you, we don't use email at all internally. Um, and, that's all handled in our case management system. So when a task is assigned, who's it going to? It's tracked in the system. We know what the due date is and kind of what the expectation is for that particular thing. And we can see, when that's coming up, and they can look at it from a dashboard of, here's my, 5 things that are due this week or what have you. So we can kind of, a lot of those old timey ways of checking in on the status of projects are now tracked in a cloud platform. Because, like, it's important to understand, like, a lot of this stuff, none of this stuff is localized to one computer. It's all hosted in a kind of combined system online that we can all see the same thing all the time. So we don't have, like, separate versions of documents on, Jim's computer and Jane's computer. We're all working from the exact same version of the document through Google Docs or whatever we're working in. But definitely an area where tech is an important piece. So aside from these kind of, like, operational things, we talked a little bit about external communication with the clients, internal communication with the team. Um, let's talk marketing for a minute. So, like, how did you go about, how would you recommend going about, if somebody's interested in setting up a virtual practice, how would you do that? Like, how do you get this out in front of the world? Like, what about Google? What's that going to look like? Tell me a little about your kind of experience with that.
Yeah, so at least, when it comes to, kind of the virtual office front when it comes to marketing, I mean, since I have a brick and mortar office, right? I mean, I have an actual physical office space. Um, it doesn't a lot of that stuff doesn't really apply to me, right? Because I have an actual physical address, to where my mail actually comes to, where I'm actually sitting at, right? I was always one of those people that, um, did not want probably could not work at home, because I physically wanted the separation of leaving my house every day and having a routine where I go to somewhere else. When I walk in that door, then it's time to work, right? As opposed to, I know there's lots of people that work, they have virtual law firms that work, they work from their main office is their house, right? They have an office in their house that they work. Um, but so for marketing purposes, my firm is really set up, just like any other non-virtual firm, right? If it was just an office building, right, where I have my address and my mail and everything, and there really isn't. I've always kind of thought about potentially, because I mean, here's one thing I'm still doing. I still go through my mail. I have a stack of mail here from being out for a week, that I need to go through and open up and scan in and stuff. It's like, I know I shouldn't be doing that, but, at the end of the day, I get a lot of original court documents from the original documents from the court that, it might be more of a pain in the ass for me to, have somebody else, scan those in and then show me which ones to send to me, right? And which ones to discard, right? So it's kind of a catch-22 there, but, I know you have basically a completely virtual office, meaning you don't actually have an office space that you rent, right? So what are you using when it comes to making those, and I'm assuming you have an address on Google that allows you to advertise from as your address. So, what are you using from that perspective?
So when I first started, we had to do, I had to set it up as a Google service area business because I didn't have a physical address. And it actually continues that way today. We have a virtual mailing address. But at least at the time I was setting it up, apparently Google wasn't favorable to virtual mailing addresses. And there was some question about whether they're going to block your listing. I don't know if that's true today, but it was at the time. And so we set that up as a Google service area business because we didn't have a specific thing. And you don't have to list an address. And, there's some questions about, does it affect your local map pack ranking and how does that work? And, I think there are interesting questions to be explored there. Um, but that's kind of how we handled it is we got our Google business page up there as a service area, had the website and the phone answering. We had Smith AI answering our phones, which helps kind of outsource the reception component of it. So we don't have a physical person in a chair there. So, they're answering the phones. And then from a mail perspective, we've got a pretty interesting, or what I think it's pretty interesting setup where we use what was Earth Class Mail for receiving paper mail. And they gave us a virtual address, but now they just got acquired by LegalZoom, I think. We'll see what that means. But all the mail comes into Earth Class Mail, and they're basically just a virtual mail service, and they scan every document that comes in. And in our system, it gets digitized into PDF. And then fortunately, they have a Zapier connection. So the scan of the document gets pushed into a Google Drive folder and into Airtable. So we have kind of a virtual mailroom dashboard where we can see all of the mail that comes in to the firm. And before it actually comes into the dashboard, it's run through ChatGPT. So it's kind of read and sorted and assigned to the correct team members. And the name of the document is generated automatically. And wherever possible, it's actually detecting the case and the cause number and the decedent's name and using that to kind of look it up and attach it to the correct case file in our system. So I'd say about 70% of the time, our mail is being automatically sorted by artificial intelligence, which is pretty cool.
Super
But
cool,
so
by
that,
the way. I was waiting for ChatGPT to come into this, and there it is.
yeah,
So
yeah, it's fun. It works pretty well. Like there are definitely still some limitations, but it works pretty well. And then other than that, like anything that doesn't get auto triaged by the AI, we just kind of go through on our team on the dashboard and say, well, this is a document for the Johnson case. We'll click it and assign it and, decide what to do with it. Like, does it need to be sent to the client or filed with the court or whatever? But you're right. Like original documents do come in and we have to have those forwarded and, there's charges associated with that. And it does add a few steps, but overall it has been super helpful and I don't have to have my personal mailing address on the pleadings anymore, which is nice. We had a few strange
yeah.
incidences where people would show up at my house looking to drop off.
Oh no.
And I was like, remember where we said don't go to that address? But so that does not happen
Yeah.
anymore, thank goodness. But that's how we
That's
handle the
good.
kind
That's
of
good.
fully virtual implementation.
So how do you get the documents? Is there like a dashboard you go into that shows all of your scan stuff? Then you click a box that says "Send this to me," send the original to me, type thing, or how does that work?
Yeah, yeah. So exactly, we'd log in, and then there's you get to choose like, do we shred it? Are we gonna forward it to another address out of the mail processing facility? And those are really the two big ones. The other thing they do that's kind of nice is they'll cash our checks for us too. So if clients are mailing in checks or somebody else, it'll show up in the dashboard and it says, hey, you've got a check to deposit here, and I just click a button and it cashes the check and voila. So
Does
it's
the money go into your account or?
it does. It goes into my account, into our firm
That's
operations
good.
account. So
So
yeah,
you
it
connect
works.
you actually connect your bank account to the mailing service, and they're able to
Yeah,
just deposit those into your account?
that's right. That's right. They direct deposit any
Interesting.
checks that come in up to a certain number a month, and I think you can pay for extras and stuff like that. But yeah, and I mean, so then from our like virtual mail service, I think we pay like on average, it's probably anywhere from like 80 to like $150 a month for our virtual virtual address and mail scanning and all that. So, from a cost saving standpoint, we don't have to deal with having the overhead of a full office and all that would entail there. And so it works really well, especially for our probate practice, which is essentially entirely virtual. I could probably move to Mexico and continue running that practice most of the time. So, but
Yeah, and I think that, and I know we're going really deep and on these kind of specific issues, which is great. I want to take a step back and just talk about, um, building the law firm, the virtual law firm, like kind of why, what is kind of your vision of, the law firm in the future? And, for me, it was never really, I'm going to build a virtual law firm so I can be, flexible and move around, the country or, work wherever I want. It was never really, that wasn't the starting point. It was more of just, hey, let's just make things easier, with what we were working with, right? So I started out with having, an office. I still have an office, but I had my first staff member I hired locally, uh, my paralegal, and so we were in the same office working together. There was not a whole lot of virtual components, right? But I realized, with you talked about walking down the office, talking with somebody. The amount of time I would spend walking down this small hall and saying like, "Hey, what about this, or this," or having a conversation, like that was constant, right? And so then my paralegal moved out of state, and I was just like, "I have to find a new paralegal. This is terrible." And my wife at the time was like, I still have the same wife, by the way, but at the time, my wife was saying, "Hey, why don't you just see if your paralegal wants to work for you remotely?" And I was like, "That's a great idea." And
yeah,
so, um, then we had to kind of I kinda had to just kind of on the fly just start creating virtual systems and kind of go that route. But, once I did that, with the teams and the video and, having all the software, everybody having access to different pieces of the software and, the case management system, and, it actually was so much more efficient than having an actual office without those sort of things, right? Sending that quick text message via Teams as opposed to walking down the hall, right?
yeah,
And doing that. So I think, for the listeners out there that even if they do have a brick and mortar office, set up your practice like you're going to be virtual, right? Like your team members could all disperse anywhere. Even if you, for purposes of when you want to travel, let's say you wanted to go out travel for a couple of weeks, right? You're able to log in. I mean, I was just out of town last week, like we said, and um, nothing changed. There was zero difficulties when it comes to operations because of I can be anywhere, and so can my
yeah.
team members, and we all log in the same platform. So,
Yeah, it's very different because like one of the there are like lots of embedded assumptions because like if you say virtual law practice, like you're implying that anybody can work from anywhere. Well, what does that imply? Well, it implies that all of your data and everything has to be in the cloud. Well, what does that mean? Well, that implication is that you have no paper, and that's a huge one. So like we don't, I came from a place where we had bankers boxes and accordion folders, spilling out of cabinets everywhere, and now
oh yeah,
it's, we have no I don't have any paper, in our office to speak of. I think we have a couple of like, original affidavits in a like one folder in my, cabinet here, but that's about it. And I probably could shred most of those at this point. Otherwise, the whole practice runs off my laptop. But for me, it was less about, like you, it was less about being able to travel or, anything like that. And it was more about, just being kind of lifestyle flexible. Like I didn't want to be spending, an hour plus in the car every day. I've got 4 small kids and I wanted to be kind of around and present. And, during my day, if I want to go, I cook the kids lunch every day. I'm around to cook them breakfast in the mornings and we hang out for a little bit throughout the day. And I can do that because I can just pop up to what they're doing and it works super well. So it was kind of mostly designed for almost selfish reasons. And I know they say you gotta put the client first and what are the client's needs, and it's like to a point, yes, but I think you can be when you're building your own business. Like one of the advantages is that you can be a little selfish in how you build it and what what you design your day to look like and how do I spend my time. And that's one of the things that a virtual practice has allowed me to do is to, you know, be more physically comfortable in the way that I'm spending my day and my where I'm at and not having to spend so much time in the car and things like that. So that's kind of been my why as far as the virtualness of it. And it turns out I've been willing to, sacrifice certain areas just to continue to maintain that. Like we don't do any Medicaid planning. There are a lot of clients in that space that, they want to see you in person and stuff like that. And that's a big sacrifice to our practice, not
Yeah.
to do Medicaid planning. But, it works and it's conducive to the way that I'm able to continue my lifestyle. And I like that. I like that a lot.
And I think that, one of the, obviously starting your own law practice, that people have their various reasons why they want to start their own firm. A lot of it, at least a piece of me for me was flexibility, right? Having that ability to set your own calendar. But, it's just something to think about when you are creating your own law practice. You're starting from scratch. Um, you know, really consider the options when it comes to, do I want a brick and mortar versus virtual? Or do I want to just go 100% virtual, or at least build the systems in the start? And then, like I said, if things come up, I had, a staff member you hire maybe moves away, you're still able to seamlessly work with them, right? So it's
Yeah.
a really good consideration, to have that flexibility. There's so much software out there, and we talk about software all the time when it comes to these different systems, but
S-
um, there's definitely some very things you can do, a lot of things you can do at the very beginning to kind of set you up for success, as opposed to having to scramble like I did and then implement new software just to fill a gap.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. So there's this conversation, this debate comes up fairly regularly of, somebody says, I'm working virtually, and then somebody else will say, you can't supervise, you need butts and seats. They're not as productive out of the office. Where do you come down on this? And do you think it's true that people aren't as productive when they're working remotely? And if so, have you found ways to work against that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that there's a good happy medium ground of between the two, right? And for my team members, we have our morning call, and then my team members are always accessible via Teams throughout the day, right? So I'm not one of those people that needs to say like, I need to be keeping track of exactly what my people are doing, right? Like we have our goals, we have our tasks. Everybody knows what the goals we're trying to accomplish for that week from a cash flow perspective on closing revenue for that week. So we kind of lay it out in an organized way, and as long as my team members get what they need to get done throughout the day, um, then I think you're just wasting your time if you're spending too much time on oversight, right? And that's
Hmm.
that's always what I've been. That's been my philosophy of setting expectations for the production, making it reasonable so that people aren't too stressed out about things, that people can enjoy to as much as possible the amount of work that they're doing, and then simply feel good about having accomplished what they did that day, and then move on to the next day. So yeah, I'm definitely not of the mentality of having people need to be monitored and sitting there all day long. But
Yeah.
we do have set hours. We have a basically a set morning start and an end start for the day, right? With an hour lunch that people can take whenever. And we actually, something I introduced about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago was our Fridays. So we have a short Friday. So everybody is done at noon on Fridays, so they can have basically the Friday to have a great weekend and kind of do their own stuff for the day. And so yeah, like I said, we have our workflows and we have our what we need to get done, and getting it done during that time period, and then kind of being hands off and letting people kind of work I think is important.
Yeah. Yeah. That's been kind of my approach as well. Is to the extent that there are like productivity problems or issues with that, my general reaction has been maybe the issue is look at a couple other issues before we start assuming that like a virtual system can't work. Like first and foremost, I think, like you said, people need to know what they're responsible for. Like if you're an employee and you don't know what your tasks are that you're assigned for that week and what have you, or you've got them written down on a piece of paper that gets lost, or there's no obviously defined deadlines and things like that. It's going to be a whole lot harder for you to be able to prioritize, or for your prioritization and the way that you spend your time to be in alignment with your employer's expectations, right? Because like the expectations need to be shared. Because like we may have
Yeah.
totally different perspectives on what the highest priority task is, and if I never tell you, this is a priority one versus priority or a lower priority thing, you know, it would be unfair for me to like get upset about that or attribute that to like a problem with like virtual law firms. So my general thinking is like they need to be aware of what they're responsible for, and then, you know, I think that starts with like uh, virtual task tracking. So making sure whatever your project case management software is keeping it clear on who's assigned to what. And ideally do not assign more than one person to anything. Like it's harder to keep people accountable when you have multiple people assigned to one thing. Um, and then you're making sure there's deadlines set, like this needs to be done by then, and then holding people accountable. If it's not done by then, like sitting them down and having a conversation, be like, look, your job is to get this done. You were assigned these things and I'm noticing that you're not hitting them on time. Like that's just part of the job description. And, if you want to take it up a level from there, is stuff that everybody should be doing anyway, which is implementing KPIs and using metrics to track those things. Like, if you want people to be productive, what does productive look like? What is the number that we're striving for to say that, yeah, we had a good productive week? Like how do you measure that, right? Until you can measure that, it's just kind of an abstract concept. And if you can define that and they can hit that, then what's the problem, right? And if they're not hitting it,
Yeah.
then you have an issue to address. And it's not obvious to me that that's necessarily a product of virtual versus in person, so much as it is a problem of trying to be a better manager. Not that I'm amazing at this, that I'm learning just like everybody else, but trying to be a better manager, and then trying to actually have something definable and trackable to show for it, before you're making those kind of snap judgments. So that's kind of my take on it. The productivity debate around virtual offices, but I'm sure everybody's got
Yeah.
a story.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, the KPIs is huge. It's really important, and something we introduced recently in the last couple of months was, having our KPIs every Friday. We go over our KPIs for the entire team, right? Everybody can see what their KPI is versus the person below them, right? And so that they know, like, hey, you know, and it creates a little bit of healthy competitiveness amongst people when it comes to, hey, I want to be on the board for Google reviews. I want to exceed my goals for closing cash for that week, right?
Right.
Um, but outside of the KPIs, I think that, you talked about, having people, understand what their role is, right? And going at a more granular level is, task flow, right? I mean, having task flows where people know exactly what they're supposed to do, right? And it's not like, you know, a checklist on a piece of paper, right? It's simply, there's so many good pieces of software out there about when it comes to task flow. And, I probably need to jump off of Filevine at some point, but right now everything is just fully automated through there when it comes to their task flows. And everything kind of works. I mean, I don't touch anything. The task flows jump back and forth to people and tell them like, hey, now you do this, now you do this. Hey, don't forget to do this, this, and this, right? For this section of this type of case. So I'm fairly happy with the way it works, but I think having that piece of software for, all your task flows, and just having the tasks kind of, mapped out, right? In a very, you got to sit down and spend the time to do that, right? Get them into the system, have them assigned to people, have them automatically, go back and forth, when it comes to, making sure people get stuff done. So I think that going back to kind of wrapping this up though, with that conversation, is that having people be productive and then having those task flows run in the background kind of keeps them autonomous on their own, right? They know what the next step is. They're not going, back to me and saying, "Hey, John, what do I do next for this type of case? What do I do next for this one?" It's already mapped out. I mean, there are those questions sometimes on kind of one offers, but for the vast majority of the cases, everybody knows their role. Everybody knows what the next task is. And it's just a matter of completing the task on their end. And that
Right.
way it removes the amount of me time I spend with them, with the team members on, getting stuff done, having to have oversight when it comes to, getting stuff done.
Yeah. The last thing I think we need to cover on this, and almost forgot about it, is how to like share with a team member when you can't like walk down the hall, like when you're training people, training a virtual employee, the process for doing that when you can't walk down the hall and look over their shoulder and be like, hey, you need to click here, you need to click here. This is what you need to do to, file a petition in probate court. So I want to talk for a minute about kind of your experience, your method, your best practice um, for handling, virtual training and kind of communicating those kind of things where in a physical office you might be looking over their shoulder. How do you work with that kind of training process and information sharing process in a virtual practice?
Yeah. I know there's a lot of law firms out there that have, a library built of training videos and all sorts of things like that when it comes to training a new employee, which is something that's on my list, right? The more people you add to your team, the more you want to have that library of reference materials to where somebody can go look at something, right? And maybe it's, you recording your screen, like, here's how you file something on CaseNet, right? And you record your screen and you make a video out of it with a nice audio. You put it in the library, and then that person can reference it if they need to, right? Or it's part of their initial training materials. But we do a lot of hands-on training for the first couple of weeks. Um, and a lot of it, honestly, is just the simplistic way of sharing your screen with them through Teams, right? You share your screen. I'm gonna show you how to do it, and then you're gonna share your screen, and then I'm gonna watch you actually do it, right? And we're gonna talk
Right.
about the different things on how to do it. So, it's fairly basic from a training perspective. I think I do need to start recording some of those conversations and those training sessions. And I think on the next person I hire, I will actually do that. I'll record everything. I think that'll make things easier. But yeah, we're just, we spend a lot. We're very heavy on training in the first couple of weeks, very hands on with the new person, getting them up to speed. And then it's kind of, kind of troubleshooting and kind of solving issues kind of on the back end. But like I said, the basic, just sharing screens and doing a lot of, it's always video. I don't ever call any of my teammates, and talk to them about an issue, on the phone. It's always through a video through Teams. So we can, I can
Yeah.
see them, they can see me, we can kind of work through things.
Yeah, we have kind of a hybrid thing. Last year was the year of documenting processes, so we have like probably at this point dozens or maybe as many as 100 pages in at this. Originally, we were using a tool called Guru, which was kind of a knowledge based system that sits in your browser, and you have little cards that kind of you can embed videos in them and click things and it will show you how to do stuff. And what I was doing was recording these tutorials in a tool called Loom.com, Loom is just a super powerful plugin for your browser that lets you record your screen. So like when you're doing something, here's how you go through CaseNet and here's how you click on this and click here. And it's just really helpful for those kind of, relatively short or long, doesn't really matter, recordings of like your screen. Particularly in law, there's a lot of, on the computer work of what do we do here? How do we fill this template out? Or, things like that, to kind of teach people in video how to do these things. And what we were doing was embedding them and now it's all in Google Docs that are shared through a tool called Spacely. Spaceli it's a free platform that basically organizes your Google Docs into a nice little wiki thing. So we have all these pages of, step by step checklists, links to each other pages to help you kind of go through. It's probably it's probably excessively overbearing in terms of the number of words and videos you got to watch and stuff like that. So, and then of course the next year I changed one of our core platforms. So a lot of it is now out of date. So that's kind of the downside of the one downside of having a thorough documentation of a lot of your stuff is that you better stick to your thing for a little while. But you're absolutely right. Like especially as your team grows, the ROI or the returns to having that knowledge store grows, because you have more people who can benefit from it. More and more questions are being answered by the knowledge store rather than by, other humans. But we also do kind of a hybrid thing like you, where we jump on Zoom, screen share, walk through it. Hey, we've got to do this task. Couldn't quite figure out how to do it. I'm getting stuck, that kind of thing. So, but it's very helpful with modern technology. I mean, in Zoom now you can actually take control of the other person's screen, and I don't know if you've seen this, where you can actually manipulate their computer through Zoom. So it's really amazing now what you can do without physically being in person, without any super fancy tools. A lot of it's stuff you're already using. So that's how we kind of handle that
Yeah,
training and knowledge piece of it.
I have not seen that with Zoom. I'm gonna have to check that out because I do pay for Zoom. So, that sounds pretty cool, being able to manipulate the other person's computer or screen. All right, so we are kind of getting closer to our time here for today's episode. So let's talk about our tech tip of this week, or the tech tip for this episode. I'm going to jump in real quick and do mine. We're talking about task flows and making that really easy to, I think, much easier to run. Well, not just a law practice, but a virtual law practice, right? Having those automated task flows in the background. So my tech tip for this week is to, if you're not using a platform to automate your tasks, please do that. The days of checklists on paper are unfortunately are over when it comes to, if you want to be super productive and super efficient. There's a lot of different software out there. I know you, Dan, have a number of different things that you've used or like when it comes to task flow stuff, but I use mine through Filevine. It just it's part of my system. Whatever you're using for your case management, they're going to have task flows in there. At least start there. Okay, so but if you already have task flows kind of set up in whatever software you like, spend 5 minutes, or actually, spend an hour actually going through and removing some of those, doing an audit of your tasks, right? Making sure you're removing out repetitive tasks. Maybe you're breaking it down. It should be one task and it's broken down into 4 tasks, right? And they're having to click 4 buttons to do that, right? Something we just did recently that was a really big help was to do an audit of all of our task flows and making sure that they're efficient, and actually talk to the person who is going through and checking those boxes, who's doing the tasks. Hey, can we consolidate these 4? Hey, is this working efficiently? Hey, is this the best way to do it, right? Get that input in real time, spend an hour, and then and kind of clean things up and make things better from a task flow perspective.
Got it. So my tip is also going to be on running a virtual practice. So one of the first things that I did when I started practice is I decided I did not want to have a phone tree answering the phone. Several years later, depending on the type of clients, I think there's more nuance on how important that is. Really depends on your practice area and what you're doing. But what we did is we started with Smith AI, our virtual receptionist, out the gate, and they, had hidden plans where you could adjust down the number of calls, as we weren't getting a lot of calls at first. But there's lots of these virtual receptionists out there that can help answer your phones for you, that will connect into your CRM, or most of them have a Zapier connection, so you can push their call data anywhere you want. And one of the ways that we made it super helpful is that we gave them a special scheduling link so that they could schedule people directly to my calendar. And, we have a lot of different kinds of events. Like, we have initial consultations, or maybe it's a networking meeting with a referral partner, or maybe it's just a quick phone call with the client. They just want to check in and we need to talk about something. Or maybe it's an estate signing meeting or a design. So each one of these has different flows in our system where it'll trigger different, emails or information. So I wanted to make sure that people were being scheduled for the correct kind of appointment, even though it was a virtual receptionist who wasn't going to be the same person every time they picked up the phone. And so we were able to do this with Calendly, which is a very popular scheduling software. They have a tool called routing forms, which basically lets you create a couple of questions on a form, and that'll choose the correct booking type for you. So we have a very simple one that's like, are you a networking partner, or a potential client, or a existing client? And depending on what you choose, then you can answer, well, I want to schedule my signing meeting, or I want to schedule my 15-minute call, or whatever, or my initial consultation. And so depending on which thing the receptionist checks, they will automatically go to the correct appointment type. We don't have to train them or like get them up to speed. Like they just fill out a couple questions on the form and then they will always book the appointment type correctly. And that's worked super, super well for us to implement that virtual thing without having to have an in-office receptionist all the time. And the Calendly routing forms are super, super powerful for that. So something to look into, particularly if you're an existing Calendly user. So, guys, that is it for this week. I want to mention a couple things. If you are getting value out of this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you left a 5-star review on our Apple podcast page. Check it out, The Automated Lawyer at Apple Podcast. And secondarily, if you're interested in taking this conversation offline or continuing the discussion, check out our the Facebook community at Legal Tech Collective, where we're kind of growing the tech-obsessed lawyer people. And we kind of chat about these things all the time and have interesting discussions about technology and how it's affecting the practice of law. But that's it for me this week, John.
Awesome, Dan. Thanks for that. And good chatting with you this week. And I will see you next week.
All right. Sounds good. Take care.